In today's episode, navigating the possible versus the probable of personal finance. In other words, hope for the best, plan for the worst. Welcome to the ultimate crowdsourced personal finance show. This is Choose FI.
You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, guys, very excited to dive into this week's episode. And first, let's acknowledge that we're kicking this episode off a little bit late, at least by my watch, because Brad, apparently you got a new phone. Congratulations. Like, you abandoned the flip phone finally?
Yes, I did abandon the flip phone.
You know, I'm just kidding, everybody. You're going to get emails about that. Really? You held out that long? I'm still, no, he does. He actually was using, it did have some sort of LCD display.
Yeah, no, I had a legit Motorola phone, but it was as I'm wont to do. I had it for years, but the thing was essentially dying on me, so I had to pull the trigger here. But yeah, I did not install Microsoft Teams yet on this, so I could not get in touch with you.
Okay, so you were on a Motorola, but it's an Android device. Did you end up going to the Apple or the Android ecosystem with your new phone?
It's funny. I think Laura and I are like the last two people in America who own zero Apple products. I mean, Jonathan, we own nothing. Zero in the entire house. Our entire family, nothing. So yeah, needless to say.
This actually sets me up. I don't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to talk about that because you just this past week did you sent out a newsletter, and one of the things that you were talking about was, online security, and I'd love to get some thoughts from you on that. But I believe Apple positioned themselves as a advocate for privacy and security. And I'm just curious, since this is something that you've been thinking about lately, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I certainly have heard them say that, and it's
they did say it.
They did actually say the words. No, I mean, it's obviously it's a laudable goal. And, I think for me, I've seen so many people get sucked down the rabbit hole of the Apple ecosystem. And I don't want to even dip my toe in. I know It sounds crazy, but I understand people love their products and it might even be worth some premium, but there's a massive, massive premium. I feel like once you get in that ecosystem, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Once you get in, it's hard to get out.
I completely sympathize with, that. You're right. Once you dip your toe in the ecosystem, every additional purchase that you lock on, because it unlocks additional benefits. Right. For instance, you get the Apple earphones, whatever, the AirPods.
Yeah.
And to really get the full benefits, you need to have an Apple phone because of some of the functionality that they have. And to have the Apple Watch, you need to be in the Apple ecosystem. And so each additional decision that you make further locks you in to that. So I've been a little bit resistant, I guess, as well, although maybe not. I wouldn't say we don't have any Apple devices.
Yeah, I know you have some, but yeah, it's like a network effect, right? And I think where I fall on that scale of maximizers versus satisficers, which I know is a weird word, but I definitely am on the satisficer side. So when I find something that's good enough, that meets all my requirements and I'm happy with, I don't go that extra mile to research every other possibility that exists. That's the maximizer mindset. And I think a lot of people in our community are of that mindset. And there's certainly nothing wrong with it by any means. But for me and my happiness level, I'm very content with that satisficer of, it's like when you go to a restaurant. The way that this usually manifests itself is I'll go to a restaurant, I'll look through the menu. The first thing that I find that I'm thrilled with, I pick and I close the menu.
And then you never look at the menu again.
Never look at the menu again. Right. You don't know what you're missing, right? So and I could see your smile immediately because I think most people, a lot of people certainly, are the maximizers of agonizing over every single thing. And there's that inevitable regret of, oh, did I pick the right thing? This is good, but what would have happened? So
have you ever noticed that when you go to a Mexican restaurant, it's 85 variations of 3 dishes? It's, the menus are, I'm sorry, this is off topic, but I was just recent. Your basic options are enchilada, taco, or burrito. That's it. But there's 12, you're always impressed by just how thick the menu is.
Yeah.
It's so thick, but they're all the same thing. Your options are taco, burrito or enchilada. That's it. I don't know. So, wow. If I were going to unwind that, what I would say is the conclusion I came to dealing with the Apple versus Windows. And I guarantee you, like right now, William, who's our CTO and helps us with all the tech issues, if I say, well, guys, there's a Linux phone. It's actually fantastic. And it's open source and whatever. Anyways, where I was going with that is that I have determined that Apple makes amazing laptops. Their laptops they just last longer. They just last so much longer. They do what they're supposed to do for longer. And every Windows laptop I've ever had seems to have a planned obsolescence date of like 18 months. Just without fail, the batteries are done, something happens. I don't know what it is. You know, my wife has an Apple laptop. We like Apple laptops, but I have avoided, for a lot of the reasons you suggested, going too far into the Apple phone ecosystem, the premium, and then also you're kind of locked into the ecosystem. So I'm with you on that. But where I was going with that is that I recently read an article, and I say recently as in within the last 5 years, and it was talking about the number of Wi-Fi devices in the average American's home. And at the time it was saying that there are 12. And at the time I was like, we have 12 devices in our home that are connected to the internet, like Wi-Fi internet? That's incredible. And then recently I was just thinking about that and I was like, oh, dude, I bet we've blown past 20 at this point.
Yeah.
Like, and you really think about between the different cell phones that are in your house, maybe your online printers, your computers, your laptops, your Kindles, your tiny little Bluetooth devices that are here and there, your smart devices. Like, can you imagine how much just wireless connectivity is happening? It looks like a radiation shelter inside of each one of them. It's crazy. We blew past 12 a long time ago. And I think that really poses an open-ended question about security. If, 5 years ago, when I was reading this, it was 12 and they were relatively dumb devices. But now each one of these has technology that's 1,000 times superior to what NASA is using back in the 1960s and 70s. And they literally unlock any aspect of our life. Should we come back and spend a few minutes talking about internet, or rather online security? And since this is something that you were talking about in your newsletter, I thought I would give this back to you.
Well, yeah, that's quite a setup. I did not delve all that much into Wi-Fi devices and routers and things like that. I mean, I think that certainly is more like the 200 level. I was trying to pass along just kind of like simple common sense tips that will get you. Certainly nobody is beyond being hacked, obviously, but like, can you get the 80-20 analysis? Or really, can you do a handful of things and be ahead of 95 or 98% of people? And I think like the router, for instance, one common sense tip for that is change your password and make it essentially unbreakable, right? As opposed to just using the password that you have out of the box that's literally printed on the side of your router, right?
Well, I'm sure no one else knows what that password is. I'm sure that's private.
Right. Very, very private. So that was an example. Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll go down my list here.
Yeah. So there's probably like 50% of our audience right now is thinking, oh yeah, we're using the router password on. It's probably 75. It's probably 80% of the people listening to this episode right now are saying, yeah, I'm using the password on the back of the router.
Yeah. And it's, we do a lot of things that, like, if you could just make a one-time switch, it's worth that investment cost. And, in that case, that's a couple minutes, but, one that is a couple of hours, but I think is worth its weight in gold is using a password manager. So we've talked about, I think really the two that I've heard of that are kind of like the gold standard. And now obviously you have to do your own research. I'm not advising either of these, but LastPass and 1Password are generally considered amongst the market leaders. So that might be a good place to start. But what I did was when I started using one of these password managers, Jonathan, it was probably 10 hours. Literally painstakingly updating all of my passwords. And, I was just like a typical person. I figured obviously on my high value ones, I had unique passwords, but on many of the other ones, all the hundreds of things you sign up for, I had a couple variations of a few. So went through and generated through that password manager, all new passwords. And then the one you have to remember is the master password. So you have that memorized, committed to memory, you can't lose it. And then everything else is easier, right? So that is clearly a one-time upfront cost, but that's a fantastic one. I think another obvious one, and actually this came to mind with my new phone, is turning on two-factor authentication every place you possibly can. And now ideally not text message two-factor authentication, though if that's your only option, it's better than nothing. But you can use Google Authenticator, or there's an app called Authy, Authy. There's a couple other ones, so those are the two main ones that I know of. And yeah, I mean, if you can use those one-time codes, then it just makes your account that much harder to log into. I think there are a lot of sites that offer two-factor, but there's some sites also that offer just additional protections. Like I know on Facebook, I think there is some aspect of two-factor, but you can also be notified if anybody tries to log into your account. So you have a sense of things that are going on. Obviously, like super high value things like your email accounts. Because if somebody has access to your email account, then they have access to, hey, when you click reset your password, where does that email go? Goes to your email address, right? So that for most people is the single easiest point of failure. So put a good password on your email. I mean, that is the most important thing you've got. And put on two-factor if you absolutely can. So yeah, I mean, those, Jonathan, I see you nodding along. If you want to jump in, those to me are the absolute two highest value. I'll go through the rest of them here in a minute, though.
I mean, I could, we see news bulletins and flash alerts almost on a weekly basis that some major website has had passwords and data reaped. I mean, your identity in one variation or another has been stolen. Your passwords have been sold on the internet, like it just, I think Facebook had a massive breach and then not too distant past. I mean, literally within the last month or so, when we hear that, we probably know it's time to go update that password. But what if, you thought you were clever, you combined your two children's last name and then your date of birth and your spouse's date of birth, you put it all together and put an exclamation point right in the middle, and you're using that in 20 different places. Well, it's not what we're not talking about a scenario where one person is going through a billion records. And no, you're talking about like mass brute force attacks with all these batches. And so, if you have one password that's being used in a bunch of different places, you've unnecessarily exposed yourself. So yeah, that's a nice thing is that, if you use something like a LastPass or a OnePass, I think were the two that you mentioned. And I certainly would, be pretty comfortable with either of those as well. I personally use LastPass. Then you are going to have a different password that you do not know for every single website. And if one gets breached, that there isn't any spillover. In fact, both of these will advise you, hey, by the way, you're using this one password 20 different times. Do you want to update some of these? And you can even set it up to get alerts when a known breach has happened. And you can then get reminded to go update that one particular password. So Brad, back to you.
Yeah, agreed. And what's funny is while we were talking, I just got a little notification about an email that I just received. And this led into my, no joke, that literally just happened. The next thing I was going to bring up was don't click on links in emails you receive, if at all possible, right? So I am kind of militant about this to the point where there's no value in really clicking on links from, the phishing scams have gotten so much more sophisticated now. I'm not talking about like a newsletter, like, you get from me, or if I sign up for Tim Ferriss's newsletter or something like that, like I'll click on those links, right? But like if I get an email from somebody purporting to be Vanguard or whatever.
Or Amazon. I mean, that has happened very recently. Yeah,
absolutely. Like even if it looks legit, like again, they're very, very sophisticated. So I told you I have been very, very minorly dabbling in crypto. I just got an email from what looks like a Coinbase email. And it's funny because, I knew that this wasn't real, but it brings up like a simple thing to do is before you even click on an email is just hover over it in most email types. I know Outlook and I think Yahoo does this. I suspect Gmail does as well. But you can hover over it before you even click on it and see who sent it. And now this very obviously this is a phishing scam because it came from some bizarro email address, but it looks like a legit email. So my wife Laura got an email from Facebook yesterday that actually was a real email. Somebody was trying to access her account. And, what I did was I saw who it came from and I just Googled, is this a legit email address? And then she was able to log in. I think that's what I do. And that would be my tip to the audience here is instead of clicking on the email, just then navigate to the site and log in. You can find the same message, right? So it's just a super simple thing. There is a risk when you click on a link, plain and simple. It might be a tiny risk, but there is a risk. So there's no value in doing it. Just navigate to the site that you know how to get to. So that was a very, very timely lesson here. A couple other ones, just real quick. Avoid public Wi-Fi and logging into shared networks if you possibly can. Obviously, this might save you some data on your phone if you're on some Wi-Fi, but like, is it really worth the risk? For me, like if it came down to paying for extra data for $5 for a gigabyte from Republic Wireless or logging into some public Wi-Fi, like I'm going to take paying the couple bucks. Like that to me is a risk. I'm just not worth taking this.
So to clarify, this is an interesting point. So you're saying basically if I can use my phone as like a hotspot and create my own hub via that, let's say that you're traveling, you need to check your bank accounts. Your one option is to use the public guest Wi-Fi at the Hilton or whatever. Yeah, at the Hyatt or whatever. And the other is, let me use my phone as a hotspot and go through that route. You're saying 1,000 times, just use your phone as a hotspot.
That's what I do. I mean, I'm not logging into a shared Wi-Fi in a public place where there are hundreds of people accessing that network.
I've been guilty of that. I've definitely done that before.
I think we all have. And just like Fi, right? It's like, it's not about beating yourself up. Like I've done that too. I mean, I'm not saying I'm perfect by any means. Like, again, these are just super common sense things that like, if you can implement some of them, then all the better. So one that's actually really, really easy is like cutting down like the time that you're open to being attacked. Like literally, if you can shut your computer off at night instead of just letting it run or shutting your phones down, like if you're doing that a little bit before bed and turn it on a little after you wake up, that's probably 8 to 10 hours that it's off. We're talking 40% of the day you were not open for attack, right? So like, isn't that super simple?
That is super simple. I should probably consider it. Turn the computers off?
Who could imagine such a thing? But right, it's one of those things like once you hear it, you're like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. But I like this. This is helping you, Jonathan.
Well, thanks for sharing. And you could add on to that, even if you're not going to turn your computer off, maybe log off the website, right? Finish your transaction and actually log off, close that connection.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for sharing, man. Thanks for sharing. So I think it really does tee us up nicely to have a little bit of a conversation talking about this, I guess you could say polarity, or rather possibility, probability, this idea of, we make plans for the best of time, but we also guard against the worst of time. And if you're putting it into kind of this 3 categories and you're focusing on the first aspect, it's this idea of, what should the future be? What is the outlook that we're hoping for? And is this hope realistic? And so, if we're looking at our personal finance, we have this overarching goal for the short term, for the medium term, for the long term. We want to be realistic, but we also have probabilities that we can, factor into our calculus here. And what I mean by that is, I guess, Brad, so often we hear people when they use the word stock market, they also like, I took a gamble on the stock market. And those are like, in your mind, is investing in the stock market, is that a gamble?
It is not a gamble. I mean, I think that's at least the way that I look at it. So many people do conflate, like you hear it in the terminology. I'm playing the market. Just in and of itself, like that to me is, okay, you're not understanding the fundamental concept of what's going on here. Like when you are purchasing, and maybe frankly, it's my misunderstanding of how people are approaching the timeline. Like I approach things from a long-term mindset. So somebody who's looking to make a quick buck or is thinking in terms of days, weeks, or months, maybe playing the market is appropriate to them, right? So in perfect fairness, but like that's not how I look at life. Personally, I look at life as a long-term game. And what I'm doing when I'm investing my money in the stock market in low-cost broad-based index funds or in individual companies like Berkshire Hathaway is I'm saying that I want to be an owner of this company or companies in the case of an index fund, right? So when I invest, regardless of how little money it is, if I put $100 into a ETF or a mutual fund that owns 3,000 companies, I've just become a tiny owner of those 3,000 companies. I mean, obviously it's minuscule on $1,000, but when you keep doing that month after month, year after year, decade after decade, you're going to start accumulating some wealth, right? And if you think about it as, okay, now I'm an owner. So when that company does well, when the 100 million workers that work for those 3,000 companies, all of their hard work and ingenuity, they are working to create a successful business and world that I am a partial owner of. Like that is a fundamentally different outlook than I'm playing the market, right? Or I got some stock tip from some guy down the street and I think this piece of paper or this whatever on the screen is going to go up a couple bucks per share over the next 3 months. Like fundamentally different outlook.
Right. And so the key principles here are distinguishing between the concept of volatility and risk. The market goes up and the market goes down. And we have no idea what it's going to do in the short term. None. And it's amazing. It is absolutely amazing to watch the financial prophets out there telling us exactly what is going to happen, and almost with perfect precision getting at the opposite of right. They're saying this is the top. No, it's the bottom. It like literally flip whatever guess is out there on its head. And the market, and Jim says this, J.L. Collins says this, the market will do whatever it takes to make as many people look foolish as possible. So, if you're watching the video, the market's going straight up and to the right, and your financial prognostication, thought I'd take a stab at that word, get that locked down. Yours is just going straight down. Like, how did mine miss? The market's doing that. But you can just do whatever the market's doing. You don't have to do that. You thinking that you're going to be able to outsmart it. And I'm guilty of this. I promise. We're all at various points have been guilty of this. You're thinking you're going to outsmart the market. The market's probably going to make you look foolish over the long term. And so what's amazing about that is we can just keep up with the market. And so if we separate out this idea of volatility does not equal risk, then it allows us to have more peace around this idea. And we just talked about this, Brad. Maybe we could have the episode number pulled up. I think people should really listen to it with Brian Feraldi just very recently here. We'll have an episode number coming shortly. The stock market over any 40-year period of time, and we're talking about keeping up with the market. So we're talking about the investing that we always talk about on the show, broad-based, low-cost index funds, keeping up with the broader market. It has made money in real dollars, in real returns. So no funny business with inflation. Here we're saying even if there was inflation, you made money in inflation-adjusted dollars 100% of the time. It wasn't 99, wasn't 98, and that's over any 40-year period of time since they've tracked the stock market. I mean, the past does not predict the future, but wow, 100% of the time over a 100-year timeline is pretty darn impressive in terms of mapping out a probable outcome.
Right. And that's amidst depressions, world wars, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not like 100-year period of unicorns and rainbows. And yeah, to your question, it's episode 350 we just had with Brian a couple of weeks ago. It was Runaway Winners and the Balanced Portfolio was the title. And yeah, I mean, I think, Jonathan, you brought up something that's really critical is like the risk versus volatility. And I'd like to bring up opportunity costs, which I know we've talked about this a bunch of times, but you can't really talk about it too often. It's because it ties so closely into this topic, right? It's like clearly investing in the stock market, there's going to be volatility, right? You alluded to this. There are many years where there are 10% drops, like that's fairly normal. There are years where there's a 30% drop, a 50%. Like you're going to experience that if you're invested over a 50-year period. Plain and simple. If you cannot wrap your mind around that, then this might not be the right strategy for you. I would highly advise you to try to come to an understanding and be able to wrap your mind around it. I'm not saying run the other way, obviously, but it's really important to know that is coming, plain and simple. But again, opportunity cost is what's your other option, right? Is it to stick your money under the mattress or in the freezer? Sure, it's going to be quote unquote safe. Obviously, if you could avoid theft, right? But like it's going to be safe in the sense that that single dollar is still going to be there X number of years from now. But it's just been sitting there, right? And we've talked about inflation, obviously, a lot on this podcast recently. Inflation obviously can impact that, but also just simply not investing it. That's the foregone investment gains on that money just sitting there. Sure, it's going to be $1 20 years from now, and nobody's going to take it. You won't have experienced that 30% drop at any point. You won't have experienced those fairly commonplace 10% drops. But you know what you also won't experience? You won't experience that money doubling every 9 or 10 years, right? Which, again, it doesn't sound like a lot when we're talking about single dollars. But if you have $100,000 and it doubles every decade, well, 10 years from now, it's 200. 20 years, it's 400,000. 30 years, it's 800,000. Then 1.6 million 40 years from now. That would be 100,000 if it was sitting under your mattress or in your Globo Bank checking account or whatever it is, right? Like it's not growing. So that's the opportunity cost. That's the true risk of not investing.
Right. And it's double-edged because you mentioned inflation, but it is working against your purchasing power. So you making the choice to just keep it there for 40 years is not just maintaining steady. It's an erosion of your purchasing power over time. So there is a balancing act here. And we have to think about the probabilities, possible and probabilities when we're trying to figure out what is this future reality going to be. We know that inflation is a reality and has been, around 2.5% for the last 20, 30 years. It's had periods where it's gone much, much higher than that. And it appears that right now we're in a phase where it's a little bit higher. So we know that that is something that's just what's going on in the world. We have to account for that. We also know that the stock market has made money in real terms every single time, 100% of the time over a long enough period. So people use things like, well, I lost all my money during the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. I lost money during COVID. But now we need to explore this concept again. What does that mean? You lost money. So did you sell all of your portfolio, at the bottom, or you didn't time it perfectly? You got that. I think we're even in that point, we got to go back to this idea of volatility versus risk. When we're having these conversations, you are the most destructive person. You as an individual, your psychology is the most destructive variable when it comes to long-term wealth building. And this is why financial advisors, routinely say, we are worth it just because we steady the nerves. We steady the nerves of that person that sees the drop or sees the anticipation of the drop or hears the financial prognosticator and just wants to get out after already experiencing a 30% drop. Because again, they are conflating risk with volatility.
Hey, this is Andrew from the Choose FI team. Hope you're enjoying the show. We're going to get right back to it after these quick messages.
Yeah, Jonathan, even adding friction is an aspect, not that I would necessarily advise getting a financial advisor. Clearly, we've talked about that many times, but having friction built into, it's so easy to just log in and sell everything, right? Because if you're investing your own money, it is very, very easy to panic sell. But can you, if not add friction, can you think ahead, right? And I know you're a big advocate of investor policy statements, and something like that might help calm your nerves or calm the seas amidst craziness in the market when everything inside your brain is selling, log in and sell, don't lose it all, right? Like you can hear that in your own brain, but maybe having that little bit of friction of in good times, having set that investor policy statement, that might help. And I'd be curious your thoughts because I know you are a big proponent of them.
Yeah. So, we spent some time talking about, what should be. Possibility, probability. But what's happening immediately is our brains are in this, well, I don't know, but what could happen? If this worst case scenario happens, and that's great, but let's frame it different. Let's first, talk about the probable. Let's map out, and what is the probable? Well, the stock market over any 40-year period of time has produced a return close to 10%, adjust for inflation. Maybe it's closer to 7 or 8%, just a little bit above that. We talk about just using an 8% return, just 8% return. We're not inflation adjusting it. We're just saying just an 8% return. We use that in all of our personal calculations when we're just doing a rough, where do we think we'll be? What's a probable place? And what we're kind of thinking is that if you get an 8% return, your money is doubling. Brad used this term every 8 or 9 years, or maybe every 9 or 10 years, but somewhere around that, you're doubling your money. So you're kind of setting this threshold in the background that I'm going to focus on what I can control, which is my savings rate. We'll come back to that in a second. And I'm going to invest to keep up with the market. I don't need to pick the winners or the losers. We talk about this great wealth transfer that's happened over various periods of time where there's been a lot of chaos in the streets. Well, there is no wealth transfer when you're just invested in the market. Your money just goes right up with it. You don't need to pick the winners. Your investments just go right up with that. It's happening when you're over in one sector and you miss this sector, vice versa. So that little analogy that we made of the market's going straight up to the right, but mine's going down. What happened? Well, you don't miss it. If you're just invested in everything, you don't miss it. So just, kind of principle number one, we're not going to try and beat the market. We're just trying to keep up with the market. Okay, great. That's the probable. That's what we do our planning around. But I have this fear sitting on my back, this demon sitting on my back that's just like wanting me to just come over here and go into a protective place. How do we guard against that? And so from your investments, it could go to an accountability partner. It could go to an investor policy statement. I really think that that little statement that we said about just literally 100% of the time since we've been tracking this thing, you've made money over a 40-year period. And that tapered with, well, what would happen? I know there were a lot of prognosticators that have predicted crashes over the last 18 months, and we've had them melt up, right? It's just the market just continues to go straight up. At some point, these people are going to nail it. But they've been saying it for 12 to 14 years. At some point, early just becomes wrong, right? Like, I mean, and I get this. I'm guilty of it. We've all had moments where we thought with total clarity we were going to see something, but at some point, early becomes wrong. At some point, they'll be right. And that's okay. That's okay. Okay, so they're right at some point. At some point, they're right. And the market goes down. It goes down massively. All right, let's incorporate that into our investor policy statement, that possibility that at some point that we don't know, we know that they thought it was going to be 12 years ago. And, you know, the only thing you would have locked in those scenarios are subpar returns and too high of fees, you know, in these two, you would have locked in that scenario one. But now at some point, it happens. What happens then? Well, if you're invested in this general strategy, you're buying a fire sale, right? You're buying blood in the streets. Your savings rate is still your ability to scoop up, you know, stocks when they're significantly on sale. And you really need to understand this principle. Jell Collins has done a brilliant job. We've had a couple episodes with him where we've talked about that. Let's map out the scenario where the stock market just goes into a free fall. The stock market is the only place where when it's on sale, nobody wants to buy it. Unless you realize that at that point, the same amount of money that you were putting in before via your regular contributions are now buying, you know, 50% more per dollar that you invest. I don't know, 60, 70% more. You're getting more on sale. And then when it inevitably comes up, because again, over a 40-year period, it's made money 100% of the time, including the Great Depression, that money that you invested as it was cratering is just absolutely crushing it in terms of returns. And not only that, the money that you had invested, because you owned everything, in many cases, we're producing dividends. I don't know which ones because we just bought everything, but some of them produce dividends. Those dividends were reinvested, and those dividends are going much, much farther. And this is the point that I wanted to get across. People that invested all of their money right before this, you know, and this is a theoretical, I don't think anybody actually did this. In reality, you dollar cost average your way through and you've had 20% returns this year and 20% returns last year and 20% the original. But let's say that someone had $1 million and invested it in 1929, right before this monstrous Great Depression crash. And then it stayed crashed for, you know, the next 10 plus years. It took them 10 years to get back to even, and they never invested another dollar. They absolutely invested on the worst possible day. They made, at the end of that 40-year period, real money and real returns. And yes, partly because the market just came back, but part two, because when you invest in the whole market, you're invested in stocks that produce dividends. Those dividends were reinvested, and those dividends contributed to the total return. So an investor policy statement just allows us to start to identify, take those what could be, you know, bad stuff and say, how will we navigate that? We don't actually know the date. We know that the people that think they know the date are absolutely wrong, you know, all the time. They've been wrong so long that at this point, you can't even give them credit when they are right. So we just have to do what we can with the probabilities. And so if you're good with that, what would that make that investor policy statement as detailed you need? What would you do with a 30% drop? What would you do with a 50% drop? What would you do at 80%? What would you do? How would you handle it if, you know, like we just had this little test run and a lot of people thought that some people, their jobs did go away, but they repivoted and they made twice as much in a new industry. That's a very interesting thing. We don't know if we can bank on that. You know, how will you deal? How could you deal with 1 or 2 years of drama? Are you prepared for that? I mean, this is where you start to think about what will your emergency fund, your risk tolerance, aspects like that. Could you go for 2 years without income? You can incorporate these into your investor policy statement, and you can use this as a reason to say, because of the unknowns, because of the uncertainties, I feel maybe in general, I'm going to be a little bit more conservative, but we also don't know, right? The future is unknown. It is uncertain. We have to kind of put a line in the sand between, you know, the probability and the possible versus the what could be. But again, if you, what could be is just, I'm going to keep all my money in cash and I'm not going to do anything. You're locking in not only just the opportunity cost of what could have been, but you're also locking in the erosion of purchasing power due to inflation.
Yeah, Jonathan, it's interesting. As you were talking there, it brought up, you know, I don't have a lot of really successful highlights for being a stock investor by any means. I usually, unfortunately, I try not to invest in individual stocks because just like anybody, I'm susceptible to doing incredibly stupid things. But it brought up kind of the confluence of a lot of what we're talking about here, right? Is long-term thinking, not thinking about investing as gambling, but investing in the fundamentals of a business. So the one highlight that I have, I think, from my investing career is actually in around May of 2020. So, you know, at really the lows of the market, I saw the price of Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, and I had set up a limit order. I had some additional cash lying around that I had been meaning to invest. And obviously, amidst March and April, I wasn't at that point smart enough or didn't have the fortitude to put it in. But what I said was, okay, Berkshire Hathaway is a company that I believe in for the long term. Again, long-term thinking. I want to be an owner of that company. It's not gambling. So if it gets down to this price, I would like to purchase X number of shares. And it was a decent bit of money. It was, I forget exactly, but let's say $20,000 or $30,000. And, set up this limit order. I didn't think it would ever get down there. There was like a flash moment when it got down to my price. I think it was like $160 a share, which it's funny. If you actually look on the Berkshire chart, it doesn't.
Brad, is this where you're going to roll out where you have a secret membership where you can predict where to put these limit orders in?
No. The first time I've ever set up a limit order in my entire life. So yeah, believe me, I didn't even know the terminology. I had to ask you for what it was. So let's be clear.
Is that options trade? Options
is
trade,
it a stop order? Is it a limit order? No. But again, my point here is that this was a company that I want to own for the next 50 years. Okay. And I had a price that I was saying, if the market gets irrational enough that it gets down to X, even with all that cash sitting on the balance sheet at Berkshire, all the companies they own, if the market for a short time gets irrational enough, I would love to purchase this company at that price. So I set up that limit order and it was filled. And I mean, right now, again, the stock is up 70% from that or thereabouts, something on the order of that. And, again, that is not about my one sad little success by any means here, but it's just about, okay, I understand how this works, right? I understand that there are drops. Obviously, the March of 2020 was an extraordinary thing, but as you've described, Jonathan, in the cosmic scheme of things, a 30 to 50% drop is not extraordinary over a 50-year period. It's going to happen. So what's going to happen to me when that does arise? Like, I can either run scared, which, believe me, I am very susceptible to that. I know my own brain. Or I can look, hey, what is this going to look like over the long term? What can I do to actually set myself up for success when there's blood in the streets? So I think all of this ties in. And again, this is not about you and I being perfect, because believe me, I've done more stupid stuff with investing than probably, anybody who's listening to this. So this is not me holding myself out to be perfect, but it's understanding those failings that you have in your own head and trying to come up with systems to at least help mitigate them to some degree by looking at this in terms of decades, and also understanding that the probable and possible, there's going to be this intersection, right? Because that this stuff is coming. It's just a matter of when. And you can't, like you said, you can't know in some, divine way when that's going to happen. Anybody who says that they know when the next crash is going to be is a fool or a liar. But a crash is coming. I can guarantee you that it is coming in your lifetime, but I can't tell you when. Could be tomorrow, it could be 10 years from now, it could be 20 years from now. I have no idea, but it's coming.
So now this gets to an interesting place where we have the probabilities based on, the financial equation. What you earn minus what you spend is equal to this difference, of this gap. So we have this current gap and we have this ability to invest a certain amount of money, but that's a static picture at a snapshot at a particular point in time. But we do have control over that equation. And so I really think about Scott Trench, and in an episode that we did with him a long time back, I don't know if he said the phrase create your own luck. In fact, I think it was a rejection of that phrase, but rather it was a reframing. Let's create more opportunities. This is a paraphrase, I believe, but let's create more opportunities for luck to strike. Let's create more opportunities for luck to strike. So we can't guarantee when that lightning is going to happen, but we can give ourselves more at bats. We can take small measured moves that give us more opportunities to have disproportionate results. So we said, all right, Brad, what's the overarching goal? How can we double our wealth? Like boring fuddy-duddy, investing. How can we double our wealth every 8 or 9 years? Okay. Can we have an outsized influence over that period of time? And so, Brad, obviously, like I've talked about the concept, and we've talked about the concept of building your talent stack out. But I was just even rewinding that just a little bit and thinking about it through like this Venn diagram of what we put our energy into. You could use the word hobby here. It doesn't feel exactly precise because I think these are necessary life skills for this game of life. But let's just use the word hobby right now. It's a little blunt, but let's use it. Three hobbies or three different aspects that I think we should spend a little time exploring. One is some sort of money-making opportunity. Now, you could call that a side hustle. You could call that professional development, building new skills, some way to or you could call it salary negotiation, job hopping, whatever you want, changing it, some way to increase the income side of the equation. All of these are very, very possible. We're going to do our wins episode upcoming, and we're going to highlight people from our community that have shared some of their income wins. Absolutely. I don't care who you are. If you're listening to this episode, there is a way for you to increase your current income. I know. I was like, wow, Jonathan, that's super profound. Wow. But I mean, you can, if you're making $15 an hour, you could make moves over the next 6 months to be making 60 or 70K, 60 or 70K a year. You could double or triple your salary. So if the thing is, well, this would be great if I could, increase my income. Absolutely. You could also experiment with various side hustles, and you could completely eliminate the time for money equation. Brad, we both of us were probably inspired pretty heavily by Tim Ferriss's The 4-Hour Workweek. And I think the entrepreneur community has largely been inspired by that idea. But coming to the end of that, I think most people would say that doesn't exist for 99% of the people that were fans of it. But rather, if you're going to reframe that with 10 years of literally hundreds of thousands of people pursuing that, is the entrepreneur community was able to separate their time from their money. Not necessarily to say it fits in a 4-hour work week, but they were able to create some space between this. I work a certain number of hours and I make a certain amount of income. Some people would evaluate the trade-off and say, well, I was making way more in my day job. Other people would say, well, it's approaching a 4-hour work week. But really, the larger thing is, how can we create a system to separate our income earning potential from our time? And that's a really big idea. Now, that's on the money piece, but the other two aspects of this that I think are equally important. I think it's really important for people to have some sort of outlet for creativity, to create. And I don't care what that creation looks like. For Brad and myself, we really enjoy podcasting and building online businesses and that sort of thing. So there's a little bit of overlap there. But separating outside of all of that, I would say for me, I've really been interested in art, digital art, drawing. And there's just a bunch of other hobbies that go into this place that are a creative outlet for me and for my family. And you can kind of weave that in there. But I think when you find a creative outlet, not only are you exercising that creative muscle, but it also allows you to move out of this linear, brain that we, frankly, the educational system gives us a very linear mindset. From here, get there. Here's how you do it. And it takes spending some time to actually develop those creative muscles, just because we're not given quite as much of an outlet for it in our regular system. And that is one of those things that when you can start making these creative decisions, it actually influences a lot of the other things that we're talking about when we're trying to do it. You realize it's not just a linear. It's not just you're born and then you die. There's a lot of fun stuff that happens in the middle. Let's spend some time exploring that. And the last one, if we're doing these three hobbies, so we have a money-making opportunity, we have a creative outlet, creative endeavor. The last one is health, fitness, whatever you want to call it, some sort of health-related hobby. And why is this one important? Frankly, if you don't focus on your health, you're going to have less time to explore all of things that can happen between birth and death. You got to focus on your fitness in some way, shape, or form, just to give yourself more at-bats. Talking about, what are we trying to do? We're trying to create opportunities for luck to strike. If you do not give yourself some amount of time to focus on your health, you are going to have a much shorter window to fit all of this stuff into. And so this is one of these aspects when we take a step back from the possible versus the probable, and then we're also taking a look at what could be the worst case scenario to go big picture on this. Thinking about this framework for living your life is, I believe, an appropriate mindset to have.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, to me, that creating opportunities for luck to strike is so critical. So many people think you need to hit a home run, like that one lightning in a bottle type thing. And you're going to either be successful in your first attempt or fail, and then that's it. And in my experience, knowing a lot of, successful people, certainly with online businesses, it's very, very rarely your first try, right? And I think you're talking about connections. I would extend connections to two different areas. So you're making your own luck. That's what I think about when I think about connections, right? And those connections to me are both people and ideas. And that's these opportunities for luck to strike. For me, I'm not sure I necessarily fit into, like you're talking about the creativity and the money and the health. And like, I love those three buckets. Like the bucket that I kind of think of when I approach this, like from like an overarching theme is I like to just take information in. For me, like reading far and wide is like the superpower that binds this all together for me. And it's constantly updating my view of the world with new information that comes in, but also just like trying to understand where there's new information, where there's new research, where even just something like I store away in the back of my mind that you never know, is it going to help me? Is it going to help someone I know? Can I point somebody in the right direction for something? Like that has been the biggest point of differentiation, is just almost just dabbling in terms of just trying to learn a little bit about a lot of things. And I don't think I'm an expert on anything by any means, but I think I am really good at knowing a little bit about a lot of things. And it helps me then every subsequent issue or problem that comes my way, it helps me think through it quicker because I've made connections. But this goes back to the talent stack, Jonathan. It's the exact point of the talent stack. It's you don't have to be world class at anything. If you're above average, if you're in the top 20% of a bunch of things, your brain just makes connections that other people's aren't able to. And it's not because they're not smart enough or anything like that. It's just they don't have those skills. They don't have that information. And I think that's the tie that binds for me for all of this is it's those skills and it's the information. And when you have a variety of things, you can just very simply approach problems differently than anybody else, maybe on earth. Right. And I've talked about this example, and I don't want to beat a dead horse with this, but like the example of me being a CPA and also somebody who's a travel rewards aficionado and a website owner. And how can I potentially take all of those things and turn my little website, this was 8 years ago, my little website, richmondsavers.com, into something successful. And I put my accountant's hat on as opposed to my, hey, I'm a website owner. And what websites do is they get a boatload of people. Some, they, again, lightning in a bottle, they're on the New York Times or NBC Today Show or something. And like you get 100,000 people show up at your website and all of a sudden you're a success. Like that just doesn't happen. But like, how can I turn my little stream of traffic into a successful business? And again, I put my accountant's hat on and I wound up helping people one-on-one for free, knowing that they would then potentially click on my affiliate link. So the actual issue, like my solution here is not important. That's why I'm kind of glossing over it. But I approached the problem differently than anyone else had ever done anywhere on earth. And that one little connection I made led me to be a minor success on Richmond Savers, a slightly bigger success with Travel Miles 101, which led to us meeting, right? Like it's so interesting how I can point to all of the success that I've had with ChooseFI back to that one kind of talent stack moment that I had on this dopey little website, Richmond Savers. Like it's crazy when you think about it. So I know that was probably longer than you bargained for here, Jonathan, but that's how I think about the talent stack, that you just don't know. You don't know when luck is going to strike. And having a big network of people, of genuine connections, and having a lot of information in your head, I think that just helps. I think it sets you up for that luck to strike, and you're ready for it when it does.
All right. So we talked about some just principles for allowing luck to strike, which are, you can create the opportunities, you can't guarantee the luck, right? You create the opportunities, you can't guarantee the luck. So we've identified, the positives, right? We're planning around the probable and the possible. We're guarding, or at least mind mapping, what we will do or how we will react, how we will handle the negatives. But then we also need to look at reality as it is. So all of these are like future tense. What about what is right now? If we have this kind of probable possible plan of doubling our net worth every 8 or 9 years through investing, is there anything we can do, any actions that we can take in the right now? Well, we can know the rules. Taxes are a certainty right now and in the future. They are a certainty right now, and we need to know how to control, to the best of our ability, how we're navigating that. So I was recently doing a call with some actually members of the Talent Stacker. They're in the Salesforce Career Development Program. And in that call, we were talking about expenses, and we were kind of pivoting from talking about expenses to actually tax obligations and how to navigate that. And one individual on the call was like, I'm making a good income. Why should I even really worry about taxes? Like, just, all right, great. I make an income. Some portion of that goes to taxes. And we've said this on the show before, but I realized what a big deal it was. This individual did not view taxes as an expense, as a reality, and did not realize that they had any control over that and why they should even care about it. And we were highlighting in a very extreme example, if they were just to blatantly disregard the rules of taxation, they could build up $1 million or $2 million portfolio. And because they are disregarding or not caring about the tax implications, they could claim all of that net worth at once, and half of it would disappear. They're in this example, they were in a high cost of living area between a state tax and a federal tax, all being incurred at the same point. Basically, we just ran a couple calculations and saw that because they were ignoring the realities of taxation, their $2 million portfolio looked a lot like a $1 million portfolio in terms of what they were actually realizing. Now, this was an extreme case, but the reality is taxes are a real thing every year, and you have opportunities to take a look and understand the rules of the tax code and control how much of that money goes to your side of the ledger, to control when that tax burden actually hits. And we were able to show, and we all know this by now, that if you understand things like how to, understand marginal tax brackets, understand investing in pre-tax buckets, understand that. And I think the reality is, if you understand the fact that there are rules around withdrawing how much you need at any particular point in time, you don't need your entire net worth in 1 year. And most of us realize that, but I don't think we realize how drastic the implications are for our realized net worth after taxes on those two variables, right? The one where you're controlling how much you're paying yourself in income each year versus the other, say, it's my net worth, I'm just going to grab it all. And I don't know what you would do with it all, but you're just going to grab it all and put it in your bank account. Maybe I don't know. So taxes are your number one expense. It is like, we talk about food and we'll talk about food. We could talk about cars. We could talk about credit cards. Taxes are your number one expense. It is where, you cannot just disregard that from the expense side of the pie chart, which means we need to spend some time looking at what our options are to optimize our tax burden each and every year.
Yeah. And Jonathan, to me, this is one of the great superpowers of the FI community, right? Is we are aware of our ability to impact the amount of taxes we pay, right? And like you said, kind of very much in passing there, pre-tax buckets. I think for a lot of people, if you're maxing out some of your quote unquote retirement accounts, and obviously we choose not to merely look at them as, oh, this is something you can access in your 60s and 70s, right? That again, that plays into the superpower here, but that's what most people call them, right? Retirement accounts. So 401ks, IRAs, 403b, 457, et cetera, right? So if you can max many of those out, the pre-tax items, that is lowering your tax liability this year, right? That's controlling what you can control. And with all of those deductions plus your standard deduction on your tax return that we all get, many people, even people making $100,000, are paying very, very little in federal income tax. Now, that's not looking at your entire tax burden, obviously, but your federal income tax is going to be extremely low for a lot of people if you're maxing these things out. So again, it's controlling what you can control, right? And it's knowing the rules, as you said. If somebody decided all in one fell swoop, I think this is what you're getting at, to take all of their money out at some future point from all of their pre-tax accounts, just, hey, I've got $2 million, I'm going to pull it all out. If they knew nothing about the rules, that if that's in a regular 401k or IRA, that's all taxable the year you take it out. So that person then just incurred $2 million worth of taxable income, which, especially
plus
if you live in
10% penalty, right? And it's a very
right. Theoretically, right. So you live in a high tax state. You're paying the absolute highest marginal bracket for federal tax. With that penalty, you could easily be over 50%. So needless to say, we don't advise that, right? But what you also were alluding to there in passing was, okay, the rules, that's a taxable event. What you actually need to pull out is enough money to cover your living expenses that year. Or maybe you have some income or passive income from somewhere that covers some of your living expenses. Well, then you just need to make up that difference, right? Maybe you have a pension. Maybe you're, retired military. We've had some military officers on this podcast who have asked those kind of questions, like, how does this play in? Okay, maybe your yearly expenses are $50,000 and your pension is bringing in, even if it's small, it's tiny, it's bringing in $30,000. right? You don't need to pull out $50,000 from your investments. You've got 30. You just need to make up that $20,000 difference, right? So in that case, that's what you can pull out from your investments. Again, not the full 2 million. You just pull out 20 grand. That's then taxable income. And what's going to happen when your taxable income is tiny? A lot of it's going to get covered by that standard deduction. Like there's an instance where I know I'm muddling this a little bit with the pension. Let's even put that aside. And let's just say you pull out 20 grand from your retirement accounts. Sure, that's taxable income. That very obviously goes on your income tax return. But if you get the standard deduction, right now it's over $25,000, you would actually pay $0 in federal income tax in this, random little scenario. So again, it's this intersection of just understanding how these rules work, right? And just understanding that there's a future here. And the future is, okay, this is I can't control what the tax rate is 10, 20, 30 years from now, right? You can prognosticate. Now, Jonathan, right? That's part of this possibility versus probable. People love to prognosticate on, taxes are at an all-time low and we have all this debt and, tax rates have to go up. Okay, maybe. Then, that's a reasonable thought process. I wouldn't disagree with that, but you don't know. What you do know is what your tax rate is today, right? So that's how I would make a decision. But I think it's reasonable based on your understanding of the world and your own personal situation to take all of these factors into account, use your intellect, and come up with a plan that works for you. That's how I would approach this. I don't think there is a one size fits all.
Yeah. All right. That's it. That's our framework. I think we've explored in depth all of these topics. You can spend time taking a look at how to put together your 5 plan, which is, you're planning out what likely will happen over a period of time. We've spent time talking about guarding against the downside. So JL Collins, we've done several episodes with him, and you should definitely listen to episodes relating to Big Earn as well. How do I plan around downside, sequence of return risk, rebalancing, all of these. We've also talked about the value of investor policy statements. These are all searchable along with ChooseFI in our episode archives, and insurance planning, legacy planning, all of these sorts of things. And then, obviously taxation. We've spent a ton of time talking. This is the framework for building out a holistic financial plan. And I hope if this is your first year, of really thinking and taking this whole concept of, I can do this. I can actually achieve financial literacy, financial wholeness. I can build a meaningful financial legacy for myself and for my heirs. Yeah, the time, best time to start 20 years ago, second best time today. And you're listening now, so take action on this. We did create a completely free Financial Independence 101, FI 101. Brad, if someone is interested in taking that, getting started with that, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, Jonathan, just very simply, just head to ChooseFI.com/FI101.
All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.